Most Labradors are full of energy, especially if they're young Labradors. They're notorious for their appetite. It'd be hard pushed to find a Labrador that doesn't have some degree of hip and elbow dysplasia.
Hello everybody and welcome back to another Questiony Q&A. Today we're discussing all things Labrador with my Labrador, with Vet Sam. Today we're joined by Vet Sam to discuss all things Labradors.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a vet. I work at the Queen's Veterinary School Hospital in the University of Cambridge. And today I'm going to answer your questions about Labradors.
So without further ado, we'll get started with the first question. Why can some dog breeds not register when they are full and hungry?
This is a really interesting question for Labradors, right? They're notorious for their appetite. To be honest, it's actually been found over the last few years that it's not entirely their own fault, right? There is actually a genetic basis to it. A few years ago, a gene was found called the POMC gene, which is involved in this sort of signaling of when you're full in your brain. So normally your brain is able to detect when you've got enough nutrition and when you should be full enough, and therefore to suppress your appetite. It's a signaling pathway that involves leptin. And this gene is involved in that pathway. And effectively what it did is it stopped the signals to tell them that they're full. But it also it was a bit of a double whammy because it also slowed down the metabolic rate. And so not only did it make them hungrier and want to eat more and not register when they were full, but it also slowed their metabolic rate, so doubly gave them the risk for obesity. Then more recently, this is literally only a few months ago that this was actually published. There's now a second gene which has been identified in Labradors and in humans actually, called the DENND1B gene, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it is also involved in that pathway. So it's involved in that pathway in your brain telling your body that you've had enough, that you don't need to eat anymore, that you are full. And it effectively, prevents that from happening, and so stops you from feeling full when you should do. So you just keep eating, right? And so it turns out maybe the Labrador's appetite is not entirely its own fault. But yeah, there's actually a genetic reason why they can't control it.
Yeah, that's good to know. And I know my dog will be happy to know it's not entirely his fault.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that was great. So the next question here is, what health conditions are Labradors prone to?
Yeah, I mean, the big one is obesity, right? They love to eat. It's, a real big problem for them. But the next one is orthopedic disease. And the two major ones are hip and elbow dysplasia. So this is just where effectively, the two bones where they come together in the joint, they don't fit together properly. In your elbow, you've got the sort of your humerus, so the condyles of your humerus coming down here to your radius and ulna, and effectively that ball is supposed to fit like this. I did it like this, and it doesn't fit appropriately, and so each time you're moving it, it's effectively causing greater wear than it should do, which can eventually cause arthritis and pain. The same is true of the hip. So the hip is a more simple ball and socket joint. The same thing, that the ball and the socket just are not congruent. They don't fit together appropriately. And that same thing, that it just causes excessive wear and tear over time. And depending on how bad that lack of congruency is, depends on how quickly it progresses, how early they present. And so you can see Labradors with this throughout their whole life, right? They can present when they're very, very young, less than 2 years of age, if it's really very bad. Some will present in middle age, but probably the most common thing is actually that you just see slightly older dogs, sort of middle to older age dogs, who have much more severe arthritis than they should do for their age. And it's because this is actually there from when they're born, and it's just caused greater wear and tear than they should have for their age, basically. But you probably wouldn't have known. There would have been no signs of that before that, unless you'd really gone to the effort of x-raying them, which we're not going to do because it wouldn't make any difference to what we're going to do to them, right? But yeah, you'd be hard pushed to find a Labrador that doesn't have some degree of hip and elbow dysplasia. Having said that, most of the time these conditions are very manageable, right? They can be managed, the arthritis can be managed with medication. Sometimes dogs will require surgery, but often it's something we manage very successfully. The other thing is another orthopedic condition, so cruciate ligament ruptures. So I doubt many of the listeners will remember Michael Owen doing this, but it's effectively in your knee. So for dogs, we call that their stifle. You have a ligament that effectively helps stabilize your stifle during this motion, so forwards and backwards. You have two of them and they cross over like that. So that's why they're called the cruciate ligaments. And effectively, unlike Michael Owen, who did it traumatically playing football, and how most humans do it, in dogs it's a degenerative condition. So the ligament gets weaker over time naturally, and then at some point they'll just be running around and it will rupture. And then that causes quite significant lameness, often for Labradors, because they're usually slightly bigger dogs. For most dogs over 10 kilos, it often requires surgery, unfortunately. But generally speaking, they tend to do very, very well afterwards. But that's quite common. It's not just Labradors. It is the most common acquired orthopedic condition in dogs. But certainly Labradors are one of those breeds who get it very, very commonly.
Yeah, so that was a really excellent insight. Thank you so much for that one there. The next question we have here is, how long is deemed a suitable length to walk a Labrador Retriever?
Yeah, good question. Probably longer than you're capable of walking them. Most Labradors are full of energy, especially if they're young Labradors, and there's no reason, unless they've got a health condition, really to restrict them. Or if it's a particularly warm day, for example, then you've got to think about things like heat stroke. But as long as they're healthy and everything else, I'm sure they can go further than you. If you think about it, a Labrador is designed to be a working dog. They've been used as gun dogs a lot. They were designed actually to go in water and swim and collect things as well, which is why their coat's the way it is, why their tail's the way it is. But it means that they have incredible capacity for exercise, right? And that's great because we don't want them to be overweight and things like that. So there's no reason, as long as your Labrador is healthy, it doesn't have any orthopedic conditions, it's got nothing else wrong that's preventing it from exercise, they can probably go all day, to be honest. And I'm sure they would still be wanting to play at the end of the day because they have a huge amount of energy.
Yeah, definitely. It's really weird though. Mine just hates water. Like, he's so energetic, but like the second it comes to it, he's like, no, he'll avoid puddles at all costs.
Wow. So somebody needs to tell him what he was designed to do.
Definitely. So the next question we have here is, why are Labrador Retrievers considered a good family dog?
Yeah, they are still the most popular family dog, both here and in the US, right? So there must be a reason for it, right? They wouldn't have been that successful as a pet if they weren't good at it. And really, it all comes down to their temperament. They're very gentle, they're very sociable, they're quite easy to train, especially because they're often very food orientated, so it gives you a very easy way to train them. But they're known for wanting to please as well. So again, that makes them really easily trainable. And so, yeah, I think that's the main reason. I guess the drawback is that as puppies, they're often quite destructive. I don't know if your Labrador was, but they often go through this phase where, they just got a ton of energy, they're quite intelligent. And so their brain's just going crazy and they don't know they haven't learned to control it yet. And they're a bit crazy and a bit destructive. I think their temperament, that they're gentle, they're sociable, they're easily trainable. They like exercise and people like to take their dogs for walks, and I think those are the things that really have made them a successful sort of pet.
Yeah, the next question, I don't know if it applies to all of them, but because they're very energetic, but it is, at what age does a Labrador typically start to calm down?
If they ever calm down, right? I think that's often the thing. They always have a ton of energy, but I guess once they start to, become a little calmer is usually after 2 or 3 years, usually up to about 4 years. But I've met plenty of much older Labradors that are still just as crazy as when they were puppies, to be honest. In theory, it should be 2 or 3, but don't be surprised if you get a Labrador and it's much later than that because they are just full of energy.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that answer. So we've got time for one more question today on our Labrador Q&A, and it says, why do Labradors and Golden Retrievers make good guide dogs?
Yeah, this comes back down to their temperament, to be honest. If you're thinking about what they need to do, they need to have a capacity for work. So they need to be able to walk around all day. They need to be intelligent. They need to be easily trainable, both of which applies to Labradors. They've also got to go into lots of situations where there's lots of people, there's lots of things going on. And so you want a dog that's quite sociable and isn't kind of overawed by those kinds of things. They're quite calm, they like to be around people, they like to be around what's going on. And so, you wouldn't pick a breed that is easily trainable but is known to be a bit more anxious, not like people so much. So Labradors, their personality is just perfect for that, right? They want to please, they're easy to train, they're super gentle, they love being out and about and being sociable, generally speaking. And then the fact that, they're able to work all day. If they needed to walk around outside all day, they're perfectly up to it. There's some breeds, that just are not designed for that. Believe it or not, things like greyhounds, right? We think about them running around the track, but actually a greyhound would not be able to walk for that long, right? So Labradors are perfect in that sense, in their temperament, their capacity for work, their trainability, all round just makes them fantastic guide dogs.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for all your time today and for answering all our questions based around Labradors. It's been really insightful, and thank you for watching.